My name is Arjun. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cloaked. And if you probably know that Cloaked is a consumer privacy company focused on how do we put people in control of their data and their identity. And it's not just thinking about from just consumer, but the whole lens. How do we keep everyone safe as we're thinking about a world of AI and everyone trying to get to know more and more about you. But what we're excited about talking about today is that we've actually built a relationship and partnership with Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it's a nonprofit dedicated to defending digital privacy, free speech, and innovation. The EFF, I've known them since I was a kid, has been working hard for consumer privacy rights for the last 35 years. And so I'm pleased to sit down today with Rin Alajaji. Rin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Arjun. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I know this is exciting. This is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And so this is part of the programming that you all have been working on, and we've been thinking about building tools, launching tools as part of that. But across the privacy landscape, I know there's a lot of discussions around what the impact of new technologies like AI and the legislation that are happening will have on us as people and companies as a whole. So for today, I'm excited to dive deeper and just what the role for your side, the EFF, and us as consumers, what we can do as we navigate this privacy landscape. And before I want to jump in, though, I want to talk a little bit about you, Rin. Could you talk a little bit about EFF and what you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, for those who are unfamiliar with EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation is the leading nonprofit organization defending civil liberties in the digital world. Our mission is to ensure that, technology supports freedom, innovation, and justice for all. We've, as you said, also we've championed user privacy, free expression, innovation since our founding in 1990. It's our 35-year anniversary this year, actually. And we've done that through litigation, technology development, and grassroots activism, which is where I come in. And as you mentioned, I'm a legislative activist at EFF, focused on state level policy. So, with the remainder of our wonderful state legislative team, I work to monitor legislation impacting all those things that I've already mentioned: privacy, free speech, innovation in all 50 states.
Well, that's a pretty big undertaking. And as you kind of mentioned in the legislation side of things, I'm sure things have been changing, especially as we've seen from our own government. How has your role changed, especially in this dual role from being an activist and fighting the legislative battle?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually came into this work through my advocacy in civil rights and education policy in state legislatures before. And I think it's interesting because over time, I noticed that almost every issue area I was advocating in started to have this digital dimension. And the realization hit me then that, civil rights challenges are not going to stop in our, analog world. They extend very deeply into our digital world too. And as technology became more intertwined in our daily lives, the laws we pass need to address those things like digital privacy, like data security, like access to information online. So I think in the over the years, I saw my work shifting from focusing more on these like analog issue area, those real
Yeah.
life issues, to tackling also how technology impacts equity and rights, which has been very exciting and is how I made my way into this role at EFF.
Well, I think as you kind of alluded to, human rights and privacy go often hand in hand. It's one of those things that are taken away first when you start seeing changes across political, business world, and technological shifts. Well, with that, I actually would love to kind of zone in, especially things have been changing so rapidly. Over the last year, from your perspective, what's kind of stood out to you the most about the changes that are happening in the privacy space?
Yeah, I think what's most striking is that there's become a lot more awareness among the average person that companies are tracking and using your information in ways that you don't expect. And people are telling their lawmakers that they want to see action on this, which is great. I think this is partly because digital rights activists have done a really great job to reach out to other communities and issue areas. So things like LGBTQ rights, like justice, like racial justice, immigrant rights, labor. All these communities are now slowly understanding how our issues intersect with each other. And it's created a really exciting energy around privacy bills around the country recently. And these coalitions around privacy bills have started to look more diverse and represent more diverse interests. So I think that in the past year, as you asked, that's been really the big thing that I've seen change more broadly than the last year, though. I think an important change that's been happening is that, just over 10 years ago, large tech companies were completely refusing to engage in any regulation conversations. And today we're seeing them write their own weak, compromise bills because they know that, as they say, if you can't beat them, join them, the train has already passed and the masses are more aware of what's happening. So privacy is really an issue that is for everyone, and we've not always been able to articulate that very well, but we have to. And not because, there's so much data about us out there, not only because it can be incredibly dangerous, but also because the other side can out lobby and outspend civil liberties advocates tenfold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head in a few different points where we've been observing similarly. The cultural relevance piece is really fascinating. I tell a lot of team and even at Cloaked, we have Slack channel where we post different things that are happening in the privacy world and dissect and read. But even Netflix movies and things out there that have actually brought privacy into the foray or the core premise. There's like the fun ones like Old Dads and then Beef where there's been stalking, then you see scary ones like Baby Reindeer or Zero Day. There's been a lot of things where it's actually the main focus because I think you touched upon it's becoming the kind of the part. It's a fundamental human right, but how do we approach it? How do we bring that into foray? It hasn't been really distilled, and we're seeing that as you've been working through on the state side and different things. But the other point that I kind of really would love to double click on a little further is we said about the businesses leaning in. And it's something that we've talked about at length that actually businesses that invest in privacy see a positive ROI for every dollar in because it actually, when you build trust, you build a relationship, you'd be surprised. Consumers, people, they buy more often, they build a long-term relationship, they're less likely to leave your business. And so privacy is not a inhibition for you, where respecting people's and their information actually nets more revenue over time. And that's what we've learned. I don't know if you've had maybe deeper thoughts or spaces you've played in or discussed where that's really coming to life. I don't know if there's things you can
Yeah.
step into.
No, absolutely. I think the what comes to mind immediately is Mozilla Foundation, Firefox. They're organization that's really took a privacy first perspective, and consumers have appreciated that and stuck with them through it. A lot of people, are Firefox purists, will not use other browsers because of that, and it's paid off for those companies. And I think, corporations have tried to say that innovation and privacy can't coexist, and
Yeah.
that is just completely false. And it's proof that we have proof that that's completely false in those organizations that are innovating in privacy protective ways.
Well, to not jump the gun with you said about innovation, we can't, as every other talk and conference, we can't escape AI. So I wanted to kind of jump in with that. Is that let's talk about it. What is EFF's theory on it? How are they thinking about it? How are you tackling it through your advocacy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we're still in many ways trying to figure out how we want to see people address AI harms.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, laws on the books now regulating technology. There's non-discrimination laws, data privacy laws, consumer protection laws that could and should apply to AI products. So we want to be sure that, when AI tools are being used, by businesses or by the government or anyone else, they're not using it to get around those existing protections. Um, And another thing is, because it's such a fast-moving field, we need to be sure that, AI legislation actually makes sense. You'd actually be surprised how little legislators know about technology,
Oh yeah.
and that it can stand the test of time in this fast-growing field. So, like the term AI is so broad and can apply to so many different types of technology. So we don't want to have, a definition in legislation that would freeze it in this moment of time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
LLMs might change. Things might change as a whole. What do
exactly.
AI?
Yeah. Yeah, but we also, we don't want to see companies who are collecting this data and make it to train AI run unchecked if there are harms that we can see in front of us right now. So, as I said, we're still trying to figure out how we want to see these
Yeah.
harms addressed. But we also, as we've been talking about, innovation is a key tenet of EFF's mission, and AI is currently at the forefront of that. So I think we've had some sort of cautious optimism there.
I think cautious optimism is the exact way. I was at a conference once and I was trying to remember. I was room with like 50 professionals. It was like a private event, and somebody asked like, uh, who's excited about AI? And then like everyone raised their hand, and it's like, who's not? And I was the only one who raised my hand. And I was like, he's like, well, what do you do for a living? I was like, well, I work at a privacy company. He's like, well, of course you do. And so there is a this kind of like, what is the answer going forward? Because there's definitely some fears that we have to think about where AI is being used for sophisticated scams, spam, phishing. We heard about the deep fakes during the election. There's a lot of moments where it can do harm, but it's also good. And we know that technology for good, technology for bad. How do we balance it? And I
Right.
think you're right. There's definitely not a uniform answer. One thing I'd be curious from your perspective, and then probably a nice segue talking legislation, but from your side, we always think that technology should have a privacy first approach in the way they build it, they talk about it. AI is taking this kind of privacy somewhere in the middle. How do we as consumers, how should we think about it as the next 3 years is going to move at the pace, like we'll be probably spend 10 years worth of innovation in the next three. It keeps accelerating faster. How should we feel about it? How should we think about it in that cautious, optimistic view?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the same way that technology has evolved over the years, AI will evolve over the years, and people will have their own threat models on how they want to integrate AI in their lives and how it can be useful to them. Some people don't want their, you know, private notes to be
Yeah.
available for training data. Some people couldn't care less. Some people would rather have, a faster agenda or whatever it may be. So I think it really depends on your own threat model, and a lot of the tips around just privacy protection are applicable with AI as well. So just being vigilant and trying to understand what you're really handing over, and how it can be um, used to profile you or track you as well.
I think we'll definitely get into some tips because I think there's some key things that we can do where you balance both. How do you give notes to make the agenda without giving everything up for
Okay.
just asking for a summary? But I wanted to transition, especially as you talked about this kind of this next few years, things be advancing from the your work you're doing deep in the legislative. Can you talk about a little bit about specific privacy challenges you're seeing and legislative maybe wins or maybe challenges that you're witnessing during that?
Yeah, I think one privacy challenge that's come up after states have taken some of those, first steps to protecting people's privacy is that the laws that they're passing don't actually make it easier for people to exercise those rights. So protections exist, but it's incredibly difficult for you to exercise them. And an example of this is AB 566 in California this year, which is a legislative win that tackled just that. It's the California Opt Me Out Act, and it reasonably requires browsers to give people an easy way to tell websites what their opt-out preferences are. And the governor just signed this bill actually a couple days ago, and it's one of the legislative wins privacy champions logged this year. And I think the next step here beyond just passing comprehensive privacy legislation is making sure it's enforceable and that
Yeah.
people know how to use these rights that they have now.
Yeah, I think that's where you kind of the dual side. There's the win, but then how do we do the enforcement? And we learned this with Meta years ago, where they instead of following Australia's privacy rules, it was just cheaper to just pay fines, right?
Right.
There's a reality to these, but we take the wins and figure out how do we compound them. I know you've been working the state side. From the federal side, we've been also approaching work, and what's been illuminating from us was that there is a demand, but as you think about execution, the challenge has been how do you follow that through? And it's often enterprise or, as you say, browser do X, but how does the individual get involved to make it easier? So like with these wins and these challenges, like why do you view this important, and like how do you think it supports this overall movement that in terms of privacy first or your legislative or activism approach? Why do you think this is? Like you said, it's a win for the privacy advocates for the year. I'd love to
Yeah.
unpack that.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now for most consumers, there's a really deep imbalance of power between companies and normal people. Ideally, we can rebalance this by, saying implement opt-in consent, give us data minimization, set some use limitations, have non-discrimination protections, make sure all of these are enforceable. And I think that's why that's why they're so important, is that it helps you rebalance that
Yeah.
power between companies and consumers. And there's a long way to go. But those small and big changes can, throw some sand in the gears and make the playing field more equal for consumers and for those, as you mentioned, smaller privacy focused competitors to the big companies.
How do you view like so you said you need that sand, you need that wrinkle. How do you put that next to like people say, "Oh, but I don't want a cookie banner." How do you tell them that look, this but you need to start the change. And it'll get better. It won't be a cookie banner, but we need to start somewhere. How what do you say to those individuals that say, "I'd rather not have more cumbersome steps along the way?"
Yeah, I mean that's why it's incremental steps to make it easier for people. The cookie banners are annoying, which is why, the California Opt-Me Out Act makes it a preference on your browser, not on each individual site. It's little changes that hopefully make a bigger impact, and create steps to people being able to easily implement it. And I think it's a part of also the design, as I mentioned, the opposition to data privacy is very well funded and well resourced.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of times these things that seem minuscule or maybe ineffective have been amended and changed by them. And it's on purpose to make it harder for you to practice those rights because they don't want you to. And I think it's it's a great example of why it's so important to keep pushing, because if companies weren't if companies weren't so scared about consumer protections, they wouldn't be fighting so
They
hard.
wouldn't be fighting so hard or funding these
Yeah,
oppositions. But I do like that nugget you're saying that look, the change is getting better. Even the California is like it's browser preference, not a pop-up. Like you
right.
have to kind of stick with it that this thing is gonna keep compounding, but you got to keep that culture relevance. That there's a lot of different groups that do want this change and to kind of keep saying it loud
Mhm.
instead of saying there's no path forward. Uh, but with that jumping in point, how do we view it in terms of, I know you're the expert here, from the state versus federal legislation, how do we view them differently? And like, how do you think we can leverage both for actually a better privacy answer or a better privacy policy?
Yeah, I think the main most, you know, front a thing of how they differ is that the length of time it takes for a bill to pass.
Mhm.
Congress takes forever. And state legislatures can be a lot faster. And this is really important and in the terms of digital rights because things move very quickly and regulation needs to respond very quickly too. And I think I'm also a believer. it's obvious because this is my job. I do state legislative work instead of federal work, but I believe that all politics is local and that the further you get from constituents, the harder it is to pass and implement, meaningful, immediate changes in your community. Your city council, your local government is one that's in charge of things like your school district or your police department, things that you interact with every single day. And then the farther that you get from that, the more abstract it gets. So on the other hand, we have federal policy, which handles, these clunky things like infrastructure or constitutional amendments. And it can take a while for people to see the immediate impact of that. Um, but with that being said, federal policy can and should set a good baseline for everyone to build off of that on the state level. And we can't let federal policy preempt all of the good or erase all of the good work that's being done in states, especially when the state legislatures have been more responsive to their constituents than Congress has been. So I think that's why states will become the center of digital rights policy in the near future and should be, what folks are invested in.
Well, I appreciate this combo. I think as you've been focused really on state, we've been trying to do our work in the federal because I think we're in the same vein that it's a yes and story versus a no but. I think the thing that we've learned is that you're right. It's really hard to get things out. There just needs to, though, be some potentially opportunity where the combination of both creates some win. Because ultimately, these companies that we're talking about that deal with data, et cetera, are massive global corporations that affect millions of people at once. And it's hard from the single state to impose a company make a big change. But I think right with that combination is where it creates that win.
Yeah.
And it's been enlightening for me as we've been going through our own DC circuit that talking about why privacy is important, but also why it's just like you said, constituents are the main core of it. We always make the privacy dialogue about the enterprise, but I think at the heart of it, it's constituents, it's the citizens, it's the people here that they're the ones who are impacted at the end of the day. And that's who we have to really focus on this conversation and less about what does company X doing about Y. Well, what does the individual have for their ability? And our focus is what are their rights? What can they do to protect themselves? Because we know enterprise is going to fund everything to make sure that nothing happens. But we all know constituent behavior is there. That's
Right.
also here. I'm glad, and I also believe that yeah, there's this yes and story. But in my view, though, I've been struggling as we've been communicating. We're making a lot of progress on our side of the hill and talking with senators and congressmen and congresswomen. Um, what do you believe we still need to do to make real progress in digital privacy? How do we do it? You've got two people here, one working on federal, one working state. What do we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, we still have a long way to go to ensure meaningful consumer privacy. I mean, in just the last few months, we've seen the major data breaches from the platforms like T app to Discord, which have been, revealing some really sensitive personal information.
Oh yeah,
And I think the the downside and the unfortunate side here is that for most people affected by those breaches, the only options that they're given afterwards is here's a credit freeze or
it's
here's a
monitoring.
right,
Yeah.
or here's a free month for a data deletion service, which unfortunately is just a band-aid solution at this point when all your data is out there and your information is public. So I think to make real progress, we really need, as I mentioned, strong baseline privacy laws and for those laws to give every person the right over their data.
Yeah.
So the right to know who has it, the right to delete it, and most importantly, the right to seek recourse when that privacy is violated. So the right for you to go to court and take those corporate companies to court for violating your data because once that damage is done, you're not, and if you're not holding these data brokers accountable, you're not really protecting people. You're just reacting after the damage is done.
I think it makes a lot of sense that what type of dialogue does the individual have for the relationship and with the breaches is such a good moment of reflection. I used to say the statement all the time that yes, breaches are a problem, but the reality is that breaches actually reveal the bigger problem, which is that companies hold all this information about you and breaches kind of reveal it. I had this moment years ago. I think I printed out and showed people that there's a parking app that had a breach, and they said in their breach notice, your passwords and your credit card are safe. Don't worry about it. Only your name, email address, your car, make and model, your birthday, your favorite locations. Only that was compromised. But don't worry, your credit card is safe and your password is not is not broken into. And like that's where the breach kind of opens up. Is like, well, why do they have this? Why do they know my favorite like color? Like this is weird. How much
Yeah.
is being collected? Um, and I think though, there's going to be some shakeup that we have to understand how to make this forward. My favorite moment in the Discord breach you mentioned, we had a couple of tweets we saw that was forwarded. Someone said, "Well, thank God I had like a cloak number on it." And for me, that was feeling a big moment of where how do I feel good? We often celebrate when we see a cloak data point in a breach because that was an instance where your data wasn't compromised. And like
Mhm.
this is where that dialogue of how do we balance what the action against companies with how do you protect yourselves, and like that's been exciting to hear that hey, there's momentum, but it's like we just got to keep going.
Yeah,
um
I think it's just to go back to your point about Meta and in Australia and paying the fines. I think that's another thing with weak enforcement when, they're like, if you don't follow the law, just pay $100 to the AG. They're always when it's a multi-million dollar organization, they're always going to just pay the fee. But when it's you're giving people the right to go to court, individuals, they're not going to want to fight 1,000 cases because of one data breach. They're actually going to try hard to not let that breach happen. So I think that's again why we really focus on enforcement at EFF.
that makes a lot of sense. I say it's a little tricky. One of the privacy advocate is one dimension, wearing an even security hat. As AI advances, security and defense, it's always this kind of neck and neck race of one compromising the other. So it's always been a tricky thing to think about. But the core problem comes in is why does business have so much data when I'm looking for an apartment or I even open the bank account? Why do you know all this data about me that's not related to my finances? We saw the report that all 25 car makers failed. They're tracking things like sexual habits and things like, why does my car know this? Like this is where it's the why does all this data exist? But that's it's exciting to hear. I just want to close on the legislative stuff and love to hear your take. Is that what are you hearing policymakers say right now? And are you bullish about any one state's approach? I know California is always leading the charge. It sounds like maybe that's what you might lean into, but I'm not sure if you've heard some specific words from the policymakers that really give you a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think it's been really encouraging that lawmakers have been starting to recognize that, and they've been starting to question also the industry playbook that says privacy and innovation can't coexist. Because as I said, we know that that's simply not true. And they've been pushing back on that, which has been really encouraging. We've also been seeing more lawmakers in different states share notes and start to talk to each other and, talk about what makes a stronger consumer privacy policy and to not to also try to push back against the talking point that this is a quilt of different policies and it's so hard for companies to follow data privacy regulation. Well, now all of these lawmakers that care about data privacy are talking to each other and are trying to, make a universal or definitions that go across state lines. So that's been fantastic and really exciting to watch as well.
I'm glad that there is the shift in discourse, and I'd say 10 years ago, we would never see any of the conversations happening now. It's exciting to now see that momentum.
Yeah.
But I want to shift gears and talk something that you and I have actually independently shared this concept of privacy being a team sport. We always have this idea about individual opt out or what are you doing with your privacy, but it's kind of like we're all in it together type of feeling. As you mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of diverse groups, a lot of different people impacted. It's often between multiple. What I'd love to learn a little bit is just talk about first, like the fact that what are we doing today? Both, I guess, both of us are talking around how do you help individuals understand the problem? So first thing that I was to always think about is like your closest connections and what impact do you have on them when you either don't care about privacy or do care about it. We always hear the joke that, oh, my cousin is on the deep end. Doesn't use Google. He's living off the grid. Then you have people who's like, I don't care. I want to share everything. I know we have learned that at the end of the day, privacy, everyone does care. They don't come out and scream, I want digital privacy, but they show it in a lot of different ways. When you see people who are 13, 14, I always see this experience where they say, I'm going to share my Snap instead of my phone number because they don't say privacy, but they realize that's a little personal. They want to give that. We see people on dating apps talk longer before exchanging information. We see people trying to mask their addresses. People starting to be turning off their Alexas. We saw that big wave, deactivating. I was wanting to think about from your side, is there a story that either you've witnessed or experienced that maybe play this out where an individual's connection to their personal privacy expanded beyond them, and they either learn from it or maybe you have an anecdote you could help us see that privacy is not a solo problem, it's a multi-person problem.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, I mean, it's a story is probably a common one of, my aunt clicking on a link on Facebook
Yeah.
and then my mom clicking on it, and then now everyone is posting all these random, smoothie recipes on their page that they didn't mean to post. So I think that's like the perfect example of like when one person starts doing something, you think, my friend who I trust sent me this link, I should click on it. And then someone who trusts you thinks that you sent it, so they click on it. And it's this domino effect. And I think, most of us use our phones and our devices to communicate with other people. And
Yeah.
naturally, information and data on that device is not just your data, it's not just your information, it's everyone else's as well. It'll include messages from your friends, it'll include photos from your family members, emails from your colleagues. So, if you click a phishing email or somehow your data is breached, all that information from your connections is also, you know,
uh, and that's a really big point. Yeah,
right.
right.
So
You
yeah, as you said, I like the phrase privacy is a team sport because, end-to-end encryption wouldn't work if one person used it. It's called end-to-end for a reason. You might keep your social media locked down, but if your friend tags you in a post that has your location or your personal information, your privacy's still at risk. So that's why I think we all have to be, it's something that we all have to be mindful of together, and that it's not, just a team sport, it's also community care. It's a way to show that you care about your loved ones and their privacy and protecting them as well.
I think well put. I usually try to double down on this point, but saying that if you are compromised, your closest connections are too. It's an all connected web. Me personally, I'm not issuing it as a challenge, but I'd say if you're trying to hack me, I feel that's gonna be a pretty hard problem versus the easiest ways to try to approach compromising my mother, my father, my sibling. One of these are probably a better way in, and then that could compromise me. And there's the way to clicking the link. There's also ways, as you said, about phishing. Now we've seen the deep fakes. And the thing that's been really eye-opening for me in this journey is that how do you let people realize that this is a problem? I know that EFF has built different tools. I know we, as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we've also been launching tools. We got our tool called Have I Been Breached to see if you've been breached online. We have, if you've not tried on cloak.com, we have a privacy scan where you type your phone number, but each of these was most illuminating for me was the fact that a single data point can connect everything about you. Your phone number can connect both because you give it to both the IRS and Domino's, has everything about you, your family's information, your address, your credit cards, your passwords, emails, because you do it all together. And there's a lot of different solutions to it. I know that there's the legislative and activist work as the technology kind of building technologists. I said there's really cool approaches too, where you can actually poison the data. That's a really interesting concept we talk about at Cloaked, which is that because you're all connected, different points, systems that are looking to track you, follow you, aggregate about you, they're actually built on known bad human behavior. I always joke that people think your phone's listening to you, but that's not the problem here. It's like I have people I'm close to worked at the Alexa team. They're like, yes, they technically could, but in reality, there's so much simpler ways to track you. You meet friends, you're on the same Wi-Fi network, on Bluetooth, etc. And so, but
They don't need to listen to you.
they don't need to listen to you. There's so many different obvious data points. And so what you say is that, well, you can start to inject privacy by changing that behavior. Like one thing that I would love to unpack with you is how you approach privacy team sport. Because in my view, one of the things is that as when I launched TikTok, say no to contact sharing. I'm not saying don't use TikTok, but do they need to know every contact? I'd love to learn your thoughts on it. Like, what are some ways you think about making privacy really a team sport?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's also a perfect time to be asking this because we're about halfway through our Opt Out October campaign at EFF. It's a campaign that we've designed to make online privacy feel less overwhelming and more achievable, even for people who aren't tech experts. So folks can find that if you go to EFF.org, it'll be one of the top ones up there. But it really just breaks down consumer privacy advice into small tips every weekday in October to show you how to opt out of specific ways that you're tracked or profiled. And those are like practical steps for you to, switch your permissions, or as you said, click no on sharing your contacts, things like that. And the idea is that, there are things you can do personally, and that privacy is not dead. And that it's just been made unnecessarily difficult by platforms that benefit from this surveillance. Um, so things that I personally do, I think, I use a data broker deletion service similar to Cloaked, and EFF's privacy badger is something that I swear by, but I work here, so but it is our free browser extension that stops, advertisers from tracking from secretly tracking all the websites that you go to and what pages you look at online. Um, and I also would encourage folks to check out our surveillance self-defense resource, which you could find at ssd.eff.org. And that is our expert guide to protecting you and your loved ones from online spying. And it has specific scenarios for things like if you are a researcher or you're an activist, and then also just specific guides on like how to enable two-factor authentication or
The
something.
basics.
Yeah, so it's the basics and then also specific guidelines. So it can be really helpful for I think anyone.
Oh, a bit of a nerdy moment. We were diving deep into Privacy Badger. I remember in 2020, we was super excited about a lot of things. I was
Yeah.
just more incorporating other things as just being standalone, but it's awesome. Awesome thing.
Yeah.
Some of the things you've mentioned, like just there's fundamentals and there's more complex things and there's behavioral. Um, I was curious from your side, like when as somebody who's thinking about maybe even their own family, their safety, or maybe they're concerned about being phished. Um, what do you think is kind of like the first thing they could think about in terms of making some sort of impact? Like what could they change, et cetera? I know there's 100 different things. Installing privacy badge is one of them. What do you think is like a
Yeah.
first step for someone who's not doing anything?
I mean, as I mentioned, I think investing in Privacy Badger and a data broker deletion service is a good first step. There's a
Mm.
lot of them out there, Cloak being an option as well. I think folks can figure out what is best for their needs. But that is a first step, I think, to just getting all of that public information about you out there out. That includes, as you mentioned, your phone number, but also really scary stuff like your address and like your entire, history of where you've lived, your relatives, things like that that you might not want out there. So that would be my big first recommendation.
And it sounds like as you're saying that there are easy ways to start. It's not an overwhelming as privacy has been designed as we kind of looked earlier, to feel complex, to feel cumbersome. If you download your data from Facebook, it's like 22 gigabytes for the data, and you're like, what is this type of feeling? I think there are simple solutions, and privacy is not dead, as you kind of reveal this whole conversation. There has been a lot of momentum, and it's interesting. I think it said my way of approaching is you kind of. It's funny you said data deletion and these things. I view it in a three-step process. Let's start doing something about cleaning up your past. How do you defend yourself? You said threat model. How do you defend your present? And then how do you protect yourself going forward? These kind of the ways, and making some progress. Each of these will not just make you feel better, will actually have a tangible impact. And things about how things are customized to you on pricing, how things are shown to you on feeds, and then even your own mental peace of mind are all very relevant towards advancing privacy. I did want to quickly touch, because you said about there's these things we can do. I'd be remiss to mention the government's still shut down. How do you view our privacy being impacted? I know I have a fun fact, which is that if anyone doesn't know, the do not call list is shut down. So what we used to say, hey, don't spam me. Well, that's down right now. The government being shut down. I'm curious if you, how do you view the privacy dialogue or privacy impact with the government shutdown?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw that comment in the Q&A as well. It's hard to say how the government shutdown really directly impacts our privacy, because it's beyond the obvious example that you just gave, because there's really little transparency into how a shutdown generally and any future job cuts because of that shutdown could affect those safeguards around data collection. So it's really hard to tell like what we're gonna see on the other end, because of also like how long is it gonna last? You know, what is the budget gonna look like after that? That said, though, I think state governments, which have been leading on privacy issues for a long time, will continue to move forward during the shutdown, which is great.
Yeah,
And again, yeah, making it more important to focus on state legislatures in the meantime.
makes sense with the government
Yeah.
shutdown. Um, if I would love to bring us to close, and let's leave it for questions a bit, but I have a few different things I want to run by you while I still have you. If there's one thing you'd like someone who's hearing this conversation to walk away with what would that be?
Yeah, I always just like to remind people that they have more power than they think when it comes to your personal privacy, but also when it comes to civic engagement. For your personal privacy, every little privacy protective thing you do is sand in the gears. It often feels really big to manage, and companies want to make you feel like it's inevitable that they're going to trample all over you, but you're the source of information and they need you, and that gives you more power than it can feel like. So like we said, they wouldn't be fighting so hard if they weren't, if they didn't think it mattered so much for consumers to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And then in terms of civic engagement, I also would urge people to, find out what your state legislature is doing to protect your data privacy. Reach out to your representative and let them know that this is an issue you care about. Legislators hearing from their own constituents has been on any issue, but especially on data privacy, which sometimes, legislators think is this big, broad idea that no one cares about, really
Yeah.
matters. And it can be really impactful and powerful to hear from constituents.
I could have said it better. That last part about even the policymakers and people are seeing that there is a visceral reaction, something that we've been really leaning into. Even my time on the Hill that we've been going, we made that hotline is one of our tools. We call it, it tells you your things that it find online, your name, social security number, address, and that comes up because your information is being sold and shared so easily. But we had congressmen, congresswomen, and senators have their information exposed, and it was time and time again. It was very eye opening, and for us, and kind of that final thought process is that you kind of said it well. I love the sand in the gears. It's really interesting. It's like you want to make that. I would take that even one step further. Is like you want to throw sand in the gears, but we also want to talk about how should this look going forward. Right?
Mhm.
What is we have to put some brakes and stop the way that data is being shared, aggregated, stolen, or it's just prevalent. but there is a path forward where innovation and privacy don't have to live separately. It just requires us as people to talk about it, say it. I'm glad movies are bringing privacy into the dialogue without beating over our head. Hey, it's privacy, because it's showing that there is a global need and we have to serve it. And if the government's struggling to do so, and I'm glad the state group is trying to make an impact, but it's also up to companies then to keep making that progress and say, hey, there is got to be a new answer. And if you're not going to, you can't fight them. People do want to change. So let's join them and create some better approach. Could you touch upon data brokers? What is happening to stop them? What can we do to keep them from selling our data? I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I think, data brokers are a part of what we've been talking about all day for sure. They gather, sensitive information about you from all your apps and websites, and it can be really harmful. Um, I think things in recent years, states like, California, Texas, the Oregon, Vermont, have been passing laws requiring data brokers to register with the state regulators, and that this right and that the registration requirement has been really helpful actually to increase transparency about who these data brokers are and where they're operating, and what data they're selling and collecting too. Unfortunately, though, I think with data broker regulation, we've seen that again, enforcement is a big issue there. We actually recently put out some findings that many data brokers will, for example, register in one state but won't register in another because, one state has fines and the other doesn't. And that has completely undermined the efforts to hold them accountable and protect consumers. Um, so, in this case, as an example, the California Delete Act, which will soon allow customers to, just put in their name and information about them and delete from all data brokers their information. That would only work if those data brokers did register in the state and complied with the law. If they don't, then that whole law won't actually work. So I think improving transparency is a really good step to tackle the data broker issue, but also ensuring that they register in states is a great first step, and that there's enforcement for
Yeah.
those laws.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that registration is definitely a tricky part. The thing I would add is that we always think about data brokers with some of the obvious names, but to not throw shade, we know a lot of social media companies and even companies that aren't selling data but have APIs, like companies like LinkedIn, etc., that they are selling data without actually calling it as a data broker. And these things are really hard to tackle. So in my view around data brokers is that you can actually do something about it. You can try to get data deleted, and like as Rin and I are trying to do different works across the board to get companies and how they're approaching data to change, you can change these systems, because the fun fact I always say is the internet, in companies that are sharing your data, everyone wants more data and relevant data and the most up-to-date data. So there's actually a vector attack right then and there. You can inject that because you start to put new data that doesn't actually quite match or make sense. Companies and things love to gobble it up and share that out. That's why every single company believes I live in Mississippi, and I've never been to Mississippi. I've done a job
Yeah,
where everything's now trained on a specific address in Mississippi that I have never been to. And
no, that's another privacy tip to just like confuse the algorithm.
yes, it's and there's simple ways. We have another question. What's the wildest or most surprising information you've seen collected by a data broker?
I think that's a question for you because you're the one that deals with the data brokers more.
I'm happy to jump into it. From our side, the obvious one that we've seen is always the social security number is wild, and we learned from the recent administration they made it easier to sell social security numbers. I think what was really interesting is when you get into really psychological behaviors and traits where we know sexual behaviors and habits, something that people buy, which is probably one of the wild ones. Like we know the car companies. I think the craziest thing. So I got to think about that. A wildest one. Besides, that's not the obvious. Like, oh, why are they buying this? There's people who sell data, whether they think somebody's aggressive or passive, like things that get into like purchasing habits. And it just sits weird to see like, oh, I'm purchasing habit to figure out this person's an aggressive person or not, and like using my personality to change an experience or whatever they're doing with it. Like I think that personality and habits and traits, anything psychological is like that's you're playing multiple levels deep there than like my address. I get the address, then you
Yeah.
can personalize and contextualize based on my location, but my personality now gets deeper. And we know we learned this with some of the meta court cases with children and these things that they do that. They have this psychological models. But it is something that is wild to see that companies want that. They want to purchase it. They want to figure out the way you're thinking. And what my answer is that sometimes like you could just ask. People will gladly tell you some things versus trying to buy all this data.
Yeah. This reminds me of, I think, a story came out recently of people who were like looking up, pregnancy symptoms, randomly getting baby
Yeah.
formula, like things in their mail. And that's, I think, a result of data brokers getting information that you're looking up. So that's another wild.
This is not even like something that happened, 'cause we know the big Target story from like 2016 or 2018 where that woman got baby stuff before she even knows she was pregnant.
Right.
But then this is like I had a friend, this is like a month and a half ago. Unfortunately, she had a miscarriage, but she hadn't told anyone she was pregnant, and just between her and her partner. But she had been using an app. That's the only thing she could think of. And but she had gotten baby stuff in the mail or something. She got a product or she got some gift card or something, and it hurt doubly so because of the miscarriage. And it's just like, well, that's crazy, and that's happening. It's people are purchasing, looking to aggregate, and they're trying to target if they can get it. And the trick is that they don't need your name. Your They don't even need your social security number because simple data points that you type your same Gmail address in every box. Well, I don't need to figure out Arjun if you're using the same Gmail everywhere you go.
Right. Yeah. That's horrifying. Sorry for your friend's loss also.
No, it's we talked about it. She knew that in my privacy space, she was like, "Well, this I had to talk to you about this because I had the craziest experience." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm aware. I know that's being bought and sold." Um, I think from my closing question, there's no one from the audience. I'd like to pull back that concept where we started off in this speech, which is secure your world, protect your future. And you said this earlier, but maybe we could say is that what do you think is the most important step individuals can do to protect their community? As you said, it's a global problem. It's now unifying a lot of people. What do you think that important step can be?
I mean, I think talking to people, just sharing the importance of privacy and why it's important to you, and that the concept of it being a team sport, and that, if you care about me, I would like you to also care about your own privacy. So that being a message that people can take into their life, to make it, privacy as community care, as, thing that you do because you love the people that you love. Um, that would be my tip.
I love it. My response is the yin yang of it. You want to talk to your community. I see another question, so I'll jump into that. But for my approach is that start with no. Like that's something that I've always taught is like you because you're part of a community. You mentioned earlier when you upload that picture, it's got metadata, you're in it, shows location, etc. I keep telling people that when like to order a burger from Shake Shack, you have to give a phone number. Like whatever it is, but if you say no, you'd be surprised things still work. If you turn on airplane mode on Google Maps, it actually still works. And like that's where this mentality, if we're thinking about your greater community, your family, the community you're part of, you don't have to give up everything about yourself to experience a product or AI or a service. You can start with no and share what you want going forward when it makes sense. And that's been my thing around it's your community you have to think of. It's not just you. And to give an anecdote around that question for me, I don't know if anyone knows Citibank had a fine, like dropping bucket for them, but a $30 million fine. They were targeting people whose names ended in IAN because they knew that was Armenian. And they were denying them bank access or not giving them accounts, things like that. So it's a community problem. It's not a solo problem. Uh,
Right.
I see. Tom asked one quick question. I'll first start with you and happy to add. How about a hyper-local approach passed and enforced at the municipal county level? An example is restrict the use of Ray-Ban AI in a community. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of action in local communities, specifically, as I mentioned, all politics is local. It starts at local governments, using, passing legislation, passing policies that tackle these things that you interact with every day, like your police, like your schools, like your, you know, crossing guard, whoever it may be. And we've seen them actually we've seen a lot of action around license plate readers, for example, which is another privacy issue. A lot of local governments and advocates in local cities and communities push back against implementing license plate readers in their communities and cancel contracts with those companies in their city governments. So I think it's, as I said, it's where most the most direct impact can happen and where things move very quickly too. They're dealing with the day-to-day of your community, how the county moves, how much your superintendent gets paid, things like that. But those are things that impact your livelihood every day. So it's a great question. I think it's definitely something that should be that folks should pay attention to as well, especially with things like policing and law enforcement and things like that.
So I think that it leads to privacy means with this creativity coming, we have to keep the conversation going. So I enjoyed our talk today, and with that, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And Rin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'd love to make sure that the audience can find out how can they get in touch with EFF and yourself.
Yeah, so you can find EFF at EFF.org, on social media at EFF or EFF.org, and then you could reach me at rin@EFF.org. Thank you so much for having me too, and thanks for Cloaked for your support of EFF's mission.